why is Max Verstappen angry over this controversial new F1 rule? From the gist of it, it looks like this new rule works somewhat like a gag order, or isn't it? Just recently, Max Verstappen and Alex Albon, two of Formula One's most prominent drivers, expressed worry over the governing body's crackdown on political messages. Do you know why? Because the FIA, also known as the Fédération Internationale des Automobiles, oversees all FIA-sanctioned categories and amended its international sports code late last year to limit prohibited statements. I mean, this wasn't such a big deal before, so why now? According to this new regulation, athletes who seek to discuss or convey political views will need formal permission from the FIA. There's one specific clause that painfully prohibits the general making and display of political, religious, and personal statements or comments, notably in violation of the general principle of neutrality promoted by the FIA under its statutes, unless previously approved in writing by the FIA. So yeah, this is pretty damning and specific if you ask me. But the thing is, there are new F1 drivers who've always been vocal and stood up for their causes. Take, for example, Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel, two-time Formula One champions. The two have been particularly outspoken and frequently wear gear with political messages on them.
And taking a stand, standing up for what is right, and being outspoken against racism.
So can they put a gag order on these drivers? It seems so. The two have made a big deal out of criticizing racism, diversity, and climate change. However, according to Albon, the crackdown has angered many drivers. The Williams driver claimed that in light of the sport's own gender diversity campaign, We Race as One, the new rule is especially unclear. Of course, Albon already spoke up about this, saying that they're all concerned. They are very conscious of the fact that politics and political stances are delicate subjects, but they want the FIA to be more explicit about what they are trying to convey. Let's face it, this new regulation was imposed out of the blue and out of nowhere. And on a personal note, for Albon, it is confusing. He added, however, that they support the We Race as One effort wholeheartedly, but from what they can tell, it appears the FIA is moving away from that. Albon added that it is obvious that they require an open discussion regarding what the FIA is attempting to accomplish. He also pointed out that they do respect the governing body, but F1 drivers must have some degree of freedom of speech. He believes drivers have to call attention to these kinds of circumstances, particularly since many people look to them as spokespersons for global issues. Apart from Albon, Verstappen was also left puzzled by this new ruling. He's also aware that the new ruling infringes on freedom of speech. In an interview with Sky Sports F1, the Red Bull racer explained how people differ from one another, in the way that some are more outspoken than others, although Verstappen acknowledged that he's not often that vocal, particularly considering that it can be difficult for a racing driver to fully commit to it, as well as thoroughly researching everything to ensure that they are fully informed. He disagrees, though, that it is necessary because they are essentially making a statement that they're not allowed to speak out anymore. He expresses the same opinion to his fellow drivers, indicating that he believes they ought to be permitted. I mean, why wouldn't they in the first place? Everything's political. Verstappen's sentiment was mirrored by Valtteri Bottas, a former teammate of Hamilton's who is currently driving for Alfa Romeo. He added that it's not surprising that the sport would want to manage its own reputation. Still, he believes that everyone should be able to express their opinions and support causes they are passionate about. Bottas also emphasized that people should be able to express themselves freely. He sort of questions the necessity of including such things in the rulebook, and like we mentioned earlier, why the sudden implementation? But if you want more background on the FIA's new ruling, here's what we managed to find out. To reiterate, drivers are no longer allowed to make political, religious, or personal declarations while competing in the Grand Prix. This all came to light shortly before the Grand Prix weekend, which means the majority of the upcoming event is impacted by this. It affects everything the drivers say, do, or wear. Heck, even during driver parades, national anthem performances, driver group photos, and podium celebrations. They're forbidden to express their personal beliefs. In addition, drivers are banned from expressing themselves during press conferences unless asked to do so by a qualified journalist. Of course, this only applies if the remarks in question break the neutrality rule as a whole, which is understandable. From what we're seeing, the FIA does not want to offend spectators by taking a stand on issues that have nothing to do with the sport. But it's not all bad. There is a bright side to this, especially since a few expectations have been made as a result of the drivers' pushback. The FIA also acknowledged that specific actions or words might still be permitted, but only if the right process is agreed to. So now, all they gotta do is submit a request with justifications for why it should be granted 4 weeks before the event. It's a bit of a long shot, but at least they get to ask, right? But considering that it can already be too late to address a crucial issue by the time 4 weeks have passed, this proposal seems absurd at best. Avoiding this time-consuming process will result in an undetermined penalty, which is definitely not encouraging. And you know what else annoyed most of the drivers? It's the fact that the FIA and Formula can't even agree on what subjects require approval. These two bodies don't see eye to eye in some aspects. Take, for example, the Pride logo. F1 is okay with wearing the Pride logo in certain places, like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, but for FIA, that's a hard no. The drivers are still dissatisfied, even if they have made some progress. Of course, Hamilton took the initiative and declared that he would continue to do so despite the new rule. Leave it to the man, the myth, the legend himself. Hamilton reeling against FIA is one thing to be proud of, especially if you share the same causes as him. But it may not go well for him, especially since he could be punished for it. Yes, it's possible. It's written under Article 12.4.1 of the ISC. Their penalties, after all, begin with a warning or reprimand, which is essentially the same as getting scolded in school. The next level is a fine, which the majority of teams and drivers would have little trouble covering as if nothing had occurred. It's pretty easy to sweep under the rug. But then, this is where it gets ridiculous. One of the punishments for speaking out on issues of public interest is an obligation to accomplish some work of public interest. How ironic is that? Time penalties, which include a stop-go, being dropped down the grid order, or starting from the pit lane, are among the penalties that may be imposed for failing to comply with the new rule. Any of these sanctions bring off-track issues onto the racetrack and might have a significant impact on the result of a race or even a championship. This strategy, although pretending to put more emphasis on racing and away from political issues, actually worsens the racing and should not be accepted. With that, this has been why Max Verstappen is angry over the controversial new F1 rule.